Hi, I will call this special meeting of the Stratford Board of Education Finance, including Finance Committee, to order at 6:30 on Wednesday, June 1st. My name is Andrew Corcoran. I'm the board chair. I will be sitting in for our finance chair, Amy Welty, this evening. And I will turn it over to Dr. Sunday for his presentation.
I'm just going to ask you to click the slides. All right. Good evening, Board of Education members. Good evening, Finance Committee members, and good evening to my colleagues who are here in the audience. It's been a long process, and my colleagues are out there in the hallway. It's been a long process, and it's required a lot of work and a lot of time and a lot of energy, but I do believe we're on the tail end of the budget season process. And what you will see today is a presentation for our proposed reductions given financial limitations we have with the 2.5 appropriation for fiscal year 2023. Am I audible? Yes. To everybody? Okay. Before I get started, I would just like to take an opportunity to create some context, okay? As I said, it's been a long process. It's been a process that started before the winter. I would like to, again, thank you for your energies and your time commitment for this work, which culminated with the town adopting their budget on May 11th. And uniquely enough for us here at the Board of Education in the district, there was something, although the numbers did not play out the way we wanted it to, there was something quite liberating of knowing exactly the numbers and the parameters we had to work with. We subsequently went to work here at the district office. I've had individual conversations with board members. I've had individual conversations with principals. As we went through that process, there was a very explicit difference between what the board requested at 4.57 and what was appropriated at 2.5. But as I continue to lay context here, I just want to bring to the attention of everybody here that over the last calendar year, we have reduced about 47 positions over the last calendar year, and that's before this conversation now, okay? When the town appropriated us 2.5%, I had an estimate in the back of my head based on my computations that it could impact a population of our professional community as high as 35 or 40 people. With the proposal you'll see today, you'll see that number is at 27. There was no clean way to do this. Obviously, the realities are the realities, and we all know based on the last 4.5 months of work that it was unavoidable to impact personnel. But I want to, again, bring that number to attention, okay? 47 over the last 2 academic years, plus the 27, we're looking at a total number of approximately 75. 75 personnel reductions. And that is a cross-section of every professional in our professional community. That's inclusive of administrators. I think I see my colleagues here from SAA, they'll tell you that their membership has been impacted over the last year. I see colleagues from SAA, they'll tell you the membership has been impacted. Our secretaries have been impacted. Again, that number totals 77, approximately 77. For scale, that's pretty much the entire workforce in most elementary schools. And in some places, it's the workforce in the entire middle school. In one calendar year. For a different scale, that number is essentially approximately 7% of our workforce. In 1 year. We have some real needs. I think this microphone is, am I still audible?
Yes. Yeah.
We have some real needs, and Stratford Public Schools is the 14th largest district in the state of Connecticut. Don't hold me to that, I think we might be 15th, but it's up there, okay? And over the last year, over the last couple of years, we've had an increase in enrollment, but we've still decreased our workforce. Can't argue with numbers, right? can't argue with numbers. So what you'll see today is, given the restrictions and limitations that we had, is debatably the most efficient and effective scenario that we can piece together. I understand there's a tremendous amount of pain points, and for the last year I spent a lot of time with a lot of people, listening and talking, hearing the narratives. As we constructed this proposal, it was important that I took into consideration those pain points, but at the same time I still needed to be quite prudent with the fact that I can't lose sight of the work that is in front of us as a professional community, and that's centered on the work that we have to do for our children. So it's difficult because as we go through these reduction measures, even though I'm putting out a number of 77, we're talking about 77 people who have committed their time, their energy to the Stratford Public Schools over however next amount of years, whether it's 1 year or whether it's 15 years. Or we're talking about people who bring value to work with them every day. So yes, it's difficult. But why don't we do this? Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Just to give you a quick overview, I only have 8 slides, okay? I'm just going to go through this process, and then the bulk of our work today is going to reside in conversations with the committee and the board. I shared the memo with you last week, so you have had the chance, obviously, to review it. You've had a chance to contrast that against the work we've done over the last 4 months. But briefly, I'm going to cover the values that went through this process, and it's not dramatically different from where we started last December and last February. But I think with the restrictions and limitations, I can probably provide a little bit more clarity. I'm going to briefly cover the reduction buckets, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the challenges and some of the work that we have over the next week and a half, 2 weeks. Okay? So, the $2.5 million question is, where do we reduce? Right? It's not a $1 million question, it's a $2.5 million reality. And I really want to stress again that $2.5 million is a lot different than 1.3. It's a lot different than, $750,000. This is the reality that we were faced with this year. Nonetheless, we're up to the task, and we will find a way to make it work for our children and our staff. Next slide, please. Quick statement of appreciation. I'd like to express my appreciation to the board. I want to take some time to extend my appreciation to the district leadership team and our administrators and our staff that I've had the chance to talk with over the last couple of weeks. I know that oftentimes in budget season I don't bring the best news, and I wish things would have looked a little bit different as the first-year superintendent. But I appreciate the conversations we had. I appreciate the vulnerability, and a lot of the things that you shared with me helped shape my thinking. Okay, helped shape my thinking. But the one thing that I would say is quite unanimous across the board with every board member, every committee member, and all educators is that your ideas have always been centered on children and Stratford. And for me, I single-handedly appreciate that. And just know that from me to you, you're each asking all the right questions. So let's go to the next slide. So what you see here is really our philosophical approach to the work, and it was very explicit that we had our children at the center of this conversation. But some of our guiding philosophies were centered on making sure that we keep our teachers in front of our children. I was very explicit about that from the start in February 7th when I made my initial superintendent's proposal to the board, and that philosophical approach has not changed. There are personal reasons why I have that philosophical approach, but there's also research-based reasons that support the fact and indicate that the person who impacts student learning the most is the classroom teacher. I've remained in contact with our association president. We've had this conversation, and that was my commitment to them some months back, and that is my commitment today. The other piece now is also contextually understanding that over the last 2.5 years, our kids have been disproportionately impacted from a learning standpoint because of COVID-19. There's been a tremendous amount of learning loss. This year, we have demonstrated some, what I call bleeps of improvement, but what we're looking to do is obviously sustain them. So obviously COVID-19 added a layer of complexity that became a challenge for all of us as educators, most especially here for us in Stratford. But then you also layer in on the added layer of complexity with the Alliance designation that arrived here in our community in February. The nature of the work that lies in front of us is complex. The nature of the work that a teacher and an educator engages in every day is extremely difficult. You know, unless you've stood in front of a classroom in front of a bunch of 8-year-olds or in a high school with 1,000 teenagers, you may not recognize that. So we need to put a plan in a way that we have the best chance and the best opportunity to deliver a product next year that as a community we can be proud of. And then lastly, given the context that I shared that over the last 2 years we have reduced almost 75 positions, we need to make sure we examine our academic organization and re-engineer for efficiency, because as we continue to make those reductions, there's a disbursement of responsibilities that has to permeate across the district or each school. So computationally, you see the diagram on the right. We have 3 big buckets that represent the reductions today that we will discuss. First is the personnel bucket. Again, that's a cross-section. In the forthcoming slides, you will see an itemized list of the positions that are recommended for reduction for fiscal year 23. But you'll see that total of the 2.5 million that we have to consider, approximately 1.7 of that is emergent in personnel. We'll talk a little bit more broadly about that. Benefits represents 580,000, or approximately 23% of the reduction. Chief Operating Officer Pam and Ginny will elaborate on that when we get into the Q&A. And then with discretionary accounts, representing approximately 9% of these reductions. Let's go ahead and move to the next slide. So this is an itemized overview. Again, we'll have deeper conversations, but I'm just going to briefly go through this. Okay, for board members and committee members, you saw this in your memorandum last week. With Dr. Paul announcing her retirement, we've had some conversations and find some opportunities for some cost savings there by not replacing that position, but replacing it with highly qualified and credentialed administrators to support the work in the building. Again, you'll see an administrative position that's reflective there. I've heard the rhetoric for the past couple of years, over the last year, about some of the perspective that Stratford as an organization is administrator heavy. You'll see a lunch money coming out of Chapel. Sorry, Dr. Armstead.
Sorry about that.
You'll see the CIA positions as well, some clerical staff on here. And then with the grade level shifts that we have proposed, which I believe we'll spend a good amount of our time discussing today, you'll see some of the other implications. You'll see some of our health professionals and nurses that we share across with our non-public schools, reflected on this list. Some support teachers, and then you can also see that we have a hearing impaired teacher, which we don't have a large population of students who have a hearing impairment, and we believe we'll have the opportunity to contract those services out. You'll also see the tutor positions, and then we also have some projected estimated savings as they relate to retirements, and then also some summer work savings. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide, please. Again, I think this is probably quite self-explanatory. I don't anticipate we'll spend a tremendous amount of time on this reduction bucket. This is actually a win, given the numbers we got back from Anthem. Let's go to the next slide. Discretionary accounts, again, this is approximately 9% of the reduction proposal. Again, we can talk a little bit more about that, but similar to the second bucket, I think this is probably less profile compared to the first bucket, which is largely personnel. Before we go to the next slide, there's something that I think is worth putting on the radar for all of our thinking, okay? Fiscal year 23, the budget as it's presented right now is as airtight as it comes, okay? And do we all understand what this budget does not take into consideration? Inflation.
No. Those
Inflation is
grants
one.
running out.
Who said that?
The grants running out.
Yeah, the fiscal cliff expiring is definitely, it's been at the forefront of our thinking. We've talked about that broadly over the last year and a half, right? So that's going to come. Once those funds expire or evaporate, we're going to have some real tough conversations here at the board and also with the town. But this budget right now does not account for the fact that there could be external variables. For example, if we have an enrollment increase by 150 students this summer, there's no way to compensate for that. And all of our colleagues here would tell you that pretty much every classroom in the Stratford Public Schools is airtight right now. Okay, it's almost at capacity. Okay, so the $2.5 million reduction has more significance than most people may have at the front of their minds. Beyond that, as we continue to look at other things that we are trimming, for those of you who understand the complexities of organization and understand risk aversion or risk management, we have to be positioned to deal with external variables that may show up over the course of the 10 months of the school year. Okay, so it's very important that we're strategic when we make recommendations and proposals for where we want to reduce outside of what is presented at this time. We're not just making this decision now to end, the month of May, going to the first week of June. We are making a decision that we have to make sure it plays out on a daily basis for 6 to 7 hours a day, maybe 8 hours in some places, for 182 days out of the year. This is not an easy task. It's not an easy task for the board. It's not an easy task for administrators. It's not an easy task for teachers. It's not an easy task for people who walk into our buildings to support us. And I think we can all agree that our kids here at Stratford deserve everything we can give them. Am I still audible? Yes. Okay. So let's go ahead and move to the last slide. So these are some of the challenges that I think are worth noting. I think we've been through the breadth of the work of budget season. But as I said when we started this conversation, whenever we have to reduce, there is no easy part of this work. Whether we're reducing by $2.5 million or whether we're reducing by $100,000, if anybody in our professional community is impacted, there's an emotional quotient that's attached to it, okay? So as we continue to go through this process based on the direction that we move as a board, we have to begin the process of finalizing those conversations with people who are impacted. And obviously here for us in Stratford, there's also the HR process. We have a RIF process that's embedded in our contract language. The challenge now is we need to make sure that our HR department is positioned to do things as efficiently as possible before we break for summer break. Does that make sense? Okay. We only have 2.5 weeks of the school year left. So this is not a conversation we can draw out for the next week and a half or 2 weeks. We have to have honest and vulnerable conversations and make a decision and then push the play button so HR can engage in their work. The other piece now is for the people who may be impacted in a way that actually materializes where they lose the position. They've given us so much of themselves for X amount of years. And it would be the professional and dignity-laden approach to make sure that we position them to seek new employment outside of this market. Whether it's by notifying them early, writing them letters of recommendations, those are all things that we need to make sure we do. And then the last piece now is as quickly as our board makes a decision, I have been having ongoing conversations and I want to express my appreciation to our colleagues because a lot of their energy right now is focused on the end of the year stuff. But I've also buried that kernel that they should start to reflect on next year, right? So they can begin to confidently engage in those reflection points once they know exactly what their workforce will look like. So it's part of that work, and I know we take a deeper dive in August around school improvement plans, and we unpack that as a group. But there's some work in front of us as we look to close out these next 2.5 weeks. So there is a good amount that is contingent on the type of conversations that we have tonight and over the next day or two. So this is just a brief overview. I think now we're going to get into some conversations. I don't think anything that you saw in these 6 or so slides are any different than you saw in the memorandum or any different than the construct of the work that we discussed as a staff, as a professional community over the last 4.5 or so months. So at this time, I'm going to join my colleagues behind the bench, and then I will welcome conversation. District leaders are here. They will be an active part of this to respond to questions that board and committee members may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sunday. I'll wait for Dr. Sunday to join us before I open the floor for questions. Okay, any questions?
Sure. To Dr. Sunday, probably to Pam as well. Is there any surplus funds from the 2021-2022 year that could be used, or any projecting surpluses that could be used at all to offset some of these cuts that you proposed? The other part of the question is, there's a lot of, I'll call it, cooler talk out there that's saying alliance money and ESSER money, IPPJ or whatever money is out there could be used to fund these positions. If you could address both, that would be great.
Sure. I'm going to tag Ms. Mangini to speak to the first part of the question, and then I'd be happy to take the second half of that.
Sure. With regard to any year-end balance, boards of education cannot balance their budget on those funds. The only thing that can be done with those funds, and that we have encouraged the town to do, is appropriate those funds to the Education Reserve Fund. That would allow us to have some kind of a buffer for these years, like this year, where we had a lot more costs than anticipated in areas like special education, or we could use it for technology. But we unfortunately cannot balance our budget, our general operating costs on those reserves.
And just to be clear, the surplus from last year, none of that money went into an education reserve fund at the town level?
That's correct. To the best of my knowledge, no appropriation has been made to date.
Mr. David, please give me the second half of your question again.
So the second half is, there's been a lot of talk that alliance money, ESSER money, or IPPJ, whatever, there's different acronyms out there from the feds, but also from the state, the alliance money can be used to fund some of these positions.
So I can speak to the alliance piece. The answer is no, you can't. Any position that's created that's funded by alliance has to be attached to the new program that's responsive to the improvement needs that we have. But beyond that, I think I do want to bring this back to the way I helped shape that context at the start with the 77 positions, right? If you really think about it, what that might be evidential of is the fact that supplanting in some ways have happened. That's not going to be a practice that I will lead, okay? We will, as I said, we will re-engineer in ways that we can still find for efficient outcomes for students. As we design our new strategic approaches for the Alliance grants, in the circumstance that somebody who is adversely impacted with these reductions, if they happen to still be in the market, we will certainly consider them. But at this point in time, it would not be, we will not engage in the practice of supplanting, not at Stratford Public Schools.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Ms. Bell?
Just to follow up with the Alliance conversation, is there a written plan in the making or a written plan that would help us to understand that a little bit?
Yeah, so the plan is not near done at this point in time. The State Department of Education notified myself and Phil in Plainfield that we will receive a formal letter from the Commissioner's Office about the expectations that are attached to the Alliance plan and the process in the month of June. Okay, so we're waiting for that document to hit our desk. However, I do have a network of colleagues here in the state of Connecticut. I'm familiar with Alliance districts. We have begun to plan. Okay, we're not in a position where we want to release that right now. We have a tremendous amount of our coordinators, and Dr. Gator is leading that process. I've been in a couple of those workshops as well. I like the early signs of what I'm seeing, and I think that what is also evident is, as I've given them some big buckets that I would like for them to focus on with the Alliance design, those things are starting to materialize. You know, the challenge right now is there's so many brilliant ideas that there's literally about 39 ideas in each bucket. So the next evolution of this work is finding a way to curate it in ways that we use evidence-based approaches to design our plan.
Sorry. So we don't exactly have a due date for that yet, right? To the state, or do we have that date?
We don't have a hard date.
Okay.
That's going to come in that initial letter. As I made it very clear to the board and to the town, once I received the designation phone call from the State Department of Education, I was hesitant to release it until I had some kind of formal documentation from the Commissioner's office. They assured us that it would happen, it would arrive at some point in May. I think they were waiting for session to wrap up. So not May, I'm sorry, it should come this month, the month of June. And based on my conversations with other colleagues, typically we're required to submit our plans in the summer, sometime in July.
Can I keep going? Okay, great. Some of the position reductions that were presented tonight represent or appear to represent some programmatic shifts. Can you go into a bit more detail about that?
Yeah, of course. I would not characterize them as programmatic shifts as much as it is just a grade level transition. So what is presented is a grade level transition for kindergarten and first grade, which will now move across the parking lot from Soto to Johnson House.
And the intention for Soto?
We're going to shift, if you remember in April, we did a presentation to the board about different programmatic shifts, inclusive of the dual language program and disbursement of preschool programs. We will now shift some of those preschool classes to Soto. So again, I want this to be a conversation. I'm going to invite my colleagues to maybe also contribute if you have targeted questions that might fall under their expertise.
Maybe we can start with one right now. So I'm old enough to remember that Johnson was a junior high school, so it was built for 7th, 8th, and 9th graders. Now you're going to put kindergartners and first graders, 5 and 6-year-olds in that building, bathrooms. Is all of that you're going to have to retrofit? There's a cost to that. I have to put my finance hat on, obviously, on the finance committee here. Is that all been allocated? I know Rich is around, or I don't know if you want to answer that, or you want to... Yeah,
so one of the things that we do comprehensively is before we present anything to the board, we do a complete and comprehensive analysis. We will have to make some physical adjustment to the space and retrofit it to make sure that it's accommodating to our little ones. And Pam and Rich, I'll invite you guys to jump into this conversation here around some of the ideas and discussions we've had. But I do want to, and you all may know this with a little bit more clarity than I know, but I'm a researcher. And in my role, I'm forced to be a part-time historian on Stratford. But I was told as recently as maybe 2015-16, Johnson House had some preschool classes, maybe 2 or 3.
They did, right? It was in the back of the building, right? Parents'
Place.
Parents'
So
correct.
It was physically, the campus itself was physically able to accommodate preschool kids. I'm not going to say that that's exactly our idea right now, but you know, our new principal happens to be here as well. He'll have some ideas. He's got a brilliant mind around structure and design, and also our colleagues who are currently at Soto. I've also invited them to join the conversation should this plan move forward.
I would actually like to hear some of those ideas now. I'm sorry.
That's all right. Kristen, do you mind?
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Okay. I'll circle back. Mr. Geist, are we putting Mr. Geist on the spot?
You did not know.
No, so you said this is a conversation, right? And Mr. David brought up the concern that, one of my concern in terms of the design of the facility, right? Trying to fit little ones in that building. how are we going to do this? Because my understanding is that in the other elementary schools where we have kindergartners and first graders, they have like bathrooms in their classrooms, right? Where you have more of a much more mature designed building. How are we going to accommodate those needs? They running down the hallway, I just want to hear more about how we're going to handle things like that. And I'll just back up and say this. First, thank you for your plan, right? Let me go on record. Thank you for your plan, because I've sat behind, this desk. I think this is my third budget, right? I have watched the process as a community member, and in the past, I want to throw up when it comes to this point of the process, right? Like the decisions that I've seen made. And I have to give you and your team credit for a proposal that I felt was logical and thought out. However, I am stuck on this piece. And I feel like, when I come to these meetings, I have to be objective and, take my hat off of which school my child attends.
Do we have tissues?
Yep.
But I feel like, thank you. That school population is always having things done to them or decisions made for them. Whereas the other schools in this district, there are schools in this district that are untouchable. You move a pin and there's an uproar, and that's a fact. And I want to see us put effort into improving Johnson House. We just went through a short 3 years ago, a change that I feel like traumatized families, right? The students, the teachers, everybody. And here we are again, about to make another structural sort of change. And I'm not saying it is wrong, but it just doesn't feel right. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
No worries. I think I think you're asking all the right questions, and I don't shy away from that. Now, I understand, as I've shared part of my work as part-time historian, I understand the dynamics of the different segments of our community. I think part of this process is Stratford also has to probably get used to my leadership style. I'll always listen. But in my work, I think this board and I think our community is starting to learn that I always come prepared to the conversation. So if conditions were different, I would feel equally as comfortable having such a proposal for any other school in the north end of town. I will say that right now, okay? I understand the pain points and the trauma, and I do think that the trauma that has been experienced over the last couple of years, specifically in the Johnson House community, plays out in the experiences, in the lived experiences of our students and staff today. I've spent a good deal of time at Johnson House this year. I've built relationships with kids in ways that I know them by first name. I have spent a good amount of time with staff. We went through the hiring process for its next leader, and I've heard a great deal. Here's how I would frame this for your consideration, okay? The vast amount of kids who come out of Soto matriculate to Johnson House, regardless. They literally go right across the parking lot. I don't want this to be seen as a traumatic experience at all. Because ultimately, with this redesign, kids from the other programs are still having Stratford pre-Kers who are coming into Soto, right? I think one of the things that we have to be able to partition and disassociate is, and this is probably deeper and bigger work for the board, because you're 100% right. I think there's a stereotype, I think there's a stigma out there that we have to find ways through community engagement, through cultural engagement, through strategic planning to reverse the perspective on Soto as a school. We have some tremendously hardworking people there, and we have some amazing kids there. But this idea that our kids who were ultimately going to matriculate to Johnson House regardless are now being re-traumatized is something I think we need to have broader philosophical conversation on. So I don't want it to be seen in that way, but nonetheless, I think we do have to be very intentional and strategic about ensuring that the transition, right, prior to second grade is as amenable and as successful as possible for those babies. That is a fact. And I think that's where we would have to tap into the expertise of our colleagues who are currently at Soto and our new leader and the staff over there at Johnson House. But the other part that I think is important to also understand is as the kids go across the parking lot, right, the same staff that they're very familiar with are going with them. So there's a comfort in that.
So, no. My comment to that was more, I understand we're talking about the little ones, but we're still not addressing the bigger school in terms of what the change is doing there. You understand? And again, I'll say this, I'm not saying the plan is a bad plan or, right, it makes logical sense, but at the same time, we just supported shifting a specialized program out of that school because it was one bursting at the seams. It took 6 classrooms, I believe, right? And now we're saying, let's fill those with 8 classrooms now, or 8, K through first graders, right? So where's the relief? Where's the reprieve in that?
I'm trying to understand what you mean. When you say
Like
reprieve,
we're
in what
well,
sense?
I'm just saying, like, people have been managing, right? Like trying to manage bursting at the seams, but now we're saying, okay, we moved this program out with, how many students were in that? 120 or so, whatever? How many?
170.
170 in dual language?
No.
Oh,
Not in 3 through 6, or 2 through 4? No.
so
There
I'm
is
just
not
saying,
50
we're
that's coming in
shifting
next year.
the dual language students of X amount, and we're 120, and we're replacing it with how many K through 12?
160.
So even more.
The
Right,
dual language
just-
number is higher than.
No.
Just
We
to
have
add on.
KA1 at Soto.
Okay, if I'm running, we've been running the numbers as well. Don't forget that kindergarten and first grade also have dual language, and they will not be moving over to Johnson.
No, but there's
So
8 classrooms.
Our,
moving.
our estimates at this point, and again, it's as of today, so there could be more kindergarten students, but there are currently about 560 students at Johnson, and we're estimating around 540 for next year. And I think if we get more kindergarten students, I think it's going to still be very close, if not a little bit less. And I think the other thing to just keep in mind, because again, I say this all the time, but I'm just all about the numbers here. And the other discussions I'll leave to you. But I do think that there's some benefit to that. And I'm just looking again at my little cheat sheet here because I have some other information to share. But I will just add that I think, to Denise's point, there's a lot of pieces with this proposal. And I will just share that as a leadership team, there was a lot of discussion that went into it with a lot of heart and a lot of feeling. And I don't think we were just, I always joke that I'm a numbers person, but honestly, we weren't just looking at it from that perspective. I think the other advantage that I saw being kind of new at Stratford is that we are now equalizing Johnson to be an elementary school from K to 6 like all the others. So in my opinion, I kind of thought that was an advantage. And I think having all the preschoolers now, and of course Heather and Dr. Sunday can definitely speak to that better than I can, but all in one place in a school that was designed for little guys like that would be advantageous. But I also want you to know that we truly did think about retrofitting, about Kay in first grade, and Harold and Rich and Linda can speak more to that, but perhaps putting them all in one wing. And we will be putting in some smaller toilets and lower sinks. So we have thought those parts through. So for better or worse, a little bit of more information perhaps to help.
And I know, I'm sorry, like getting into the weeds in terms of the mechanics of how it would work, because I feel like that needs to be discussed in depth, right? Before you're implementing something. It's like, did we think through all the possibilities? We were just here a few months ago saying one thing, approving dispersing pre-K across the district. And now we're in, I know I sent this question to you, so like now, how did we get from there to here, right? Like what, and I get that the budget is a factor, but I would think prior to having that final budget that we were thinking that we may not get the funding that we asked for when that decision was made to disperse pre-K, right? So it's kind of like, how did we end up here now, and what makes this the most ideal versus the original plan, right?
I can speak to that. I'm also going to invite Heather Borges to chime in on this. We went through this process. Obviously, as you just stated, the 2.5 parameters was a major driver in reanalyzing our organization. But as I spoke about this piece, we also spoke about some variables that the budget does not necessarily respond to, right? One of the things that's come up in conversation, we've been having this conversation informally at the board, is universal pre-K, okay? And we talked about this, and this is coming down the pike. We've done informal analysis to kind of get an estimate of the need here in our community, and at one point we had numbers as much as, correct me if I'm wrong, Heather, 800, right, eligible?
Yeah, 2 grade levels, 3 and 4-year-olds, so about 400 at each.
So when we talk about organizational agility, we want to make sure that we're positioned to be able to respond to that if that emerges from the state level a year and a half down the road, 2 years down the road. But I would invite Heather to maybe extend on that.
So I'll just touch on a couple different points. First of all, we have lots of elementary principals here who all work very hard in their buildings, and lots of staff that work very hard in their buildings. Stratford is extremely unique that your buildings, I would say, have character. Every building. And all of these buildings and all of these principals deal with challenges. Not every single elementary school's kindergarten classrooms have a bathroom in it. If you check with Wilcoxon, they will let you know that, okay? Not every single building has a perfect area with no stairs. But we all make it work. We look at what is in our buildings, and we make sure they have what they need in order to keep our kids safe and in order for them to have a positive educational experience. On a separate note, when you're looking at your kindergarten and your first graders, everybody here will attest to the joy they bring to a building, the climate they bring to a building. When you have K through 6 together, and when you are in a building and you are dealing with maybe some 5th and 6th grade problems that are a little heavier, administrators, where do you go to get happy? You head to your kindergarten class, because they bring you joy. So, and I know that change and emotions is super hard, but when we look at the bigger picture, look at, instead of them packing into Johnson, Janice, look at them bringing joy to Johnson. Look at what that might bring to have a campus like our other campuses that are K to 6. And yes, we do need to make sure bathrooms are the right size, sinks are the right size, the rooms are large and have room for us to be able to give the kids what they need within those spaces. So that's one part. universal preschool. We've already been talking this whole time that nowhere did we have a perfect plan to fit all 800 kids if 800 people say we want universal preschool. One way or another, we were going to have to shift and move. So we're not abandoning the idea of our elementary schools taking in preschoolers, but maybe they'll have the 4-year-olds. When universal preschool comes down the pipe, maybe Soto will house our 3-year-olds, and our elementary schools will house our 4-year-olds, so they will have an appropriate transition into their kindergartens. Then that provides us space to meet all the future needs. So as all these thoughts and all these little pieces are put into place, understanding there's lots of pain points and really hard emotions, this puts us in a situation where we can still meet the needs of our kids and still meet the needs without impacting lots of other areas, with not eliminating as much staff as Dr. Sunday thought we might have to reach that 2.5. So I try to always put a perspective and a positive on things, not on what it might do to damage, but what it might do to grow, what it might do to enhance, what it might bring to a building. So I just ask that as you think about this, you think about those things too.
Heather, or Ms. Borges, thank you for your perspective on that. That is helpful in the plan. However, I have a question about the physicality of the buildings. Janice, going back to what you were saying, there's, between Soto and Johnson at the moment, there's about 830 students. And how many staff? 70, 75, 80 staff? 100? 100. Okay. What are the fire codes at that building? That building has never been that full. I'm concerned that we're upping approximately.
It's not going to be that full.
It's not going to be
Ms.
that full.
Mangini has the numbers for you for next year. It's not going to be that full. They also are losing children. So the whole Soto school is moving up there.
Right.
Soto has 4 dual language classrooms that are heading to second to lane. Johnson has dual language classrooms that are heading to second to lane. So
Okay.
you're still not going to be at a higher number than what you were at, and I believe Pam has the projected.
But also historically,
Also include pre-K and Vicky Soto School, but currently it says
6 classes going.
historically, Johnson House, it's my understanding, has operated with as much as 650 to 700 in the past.
Second to lane will be your largest elementary school next year.
Ms. Calfagan?
Can we get, Pam, a total of how many students will be at Johnson House if we moved kindergarten, first grade there?
As of today, you would have 543. As I was saying, registration continues for kindergarten, but we have had, I think, the lion's share of registration at this point, and you currently have 560.
Okay. So that leads to a couple follow-up questions. That's okay. As an interventionist myself, I look at that as numbers, right? And I know from the beginning I've said I cannot cut a classroom teacher. I will not. It's not in me. It's who I am, right? I am a teacher. But looking at those numbers of 543 estimated at Johnson House, bringing it down to 1 math coach and 2 reading specialists?
Well, right.
Yes.
Right, so I guess my follow-up to that is, that's not providing the services that our kids there will need. We have 2 reading specialists and a math coach in Lordship with 253 kids. How do we keep this, how is that equal, right? If you have 253 kids with 2 reading specialists and 1 math coach, and we have a building with 543 kids, why are we not balancing the support that they need?
Good question. See, Dr. Gator, I'd invite you, I have some things I could add, but I'd invite you to add to this.
Sure. We've had some discussion about that. Obviously, we are looking at all the resources that our students are going to need. One of the things that our buildings have are tutors, a number of tutors, and between Soto and Johnson House, there is a number of tutors that we feel will be available to the, excuse me?
They're not the same.
Tutor is not the same as a reading specialist.
Well, the tutor.
And there's 10 tutors on the chopping block too.
Right, so it's not the same as the reading specialist, but one of the things that I've shared with this group is early literacy and numeracy is going to be a core focus of our Alliance plan. And we'll have the opportunity to provide those supports. And to your point, Ms. Carol Fabian, we're approaching this work from an equity standpoint in terms of resources. I know I've had informal conversations with a few other people about making sure that buildings get what they need more than what's equal compared across our portfolio of schools. So we're still in the beta phase, but that is a core point of the work that we are doing. So you'll see that emerge in our Alliance plan very explicitly as one of the big buckets that we have to focus more on.
Yes, Dr. Sunday, is it very possible once decisions have been made as far as cuts that some positions can be shifted around within the district to make it equitable so that every school, and I think that's what you were saying, but I want to hear it. So it's equitable for students across the board, even if it means that somebody has to be moved from one elementary school to another elementary school without using any more resources because those people were already employed in the district.
It's possible. We're doing that complete analysis. We want as much parity as possible, but where there is need, we will always make sure we provide a resource. But that's also contingent on the feedback we get back from the state with the sources that we have to maybe potentially support some of that work. But internally, to your point, using an analogy of Lordship versus Johnson House, we know there's an obvious need there. And I think I've demonstrated some of that work this year with grant funding. I see Jason Cicero here supporting him with the dean. Also did a similar approach at Bunnell this year with a safety monitor. Although it's different from a certified position, I think that philosophical approach to the work is still a grounded foundation that we will continue to drive how we allocate resources, particularly FTEs.
Thank you.
Ms. Vidal.
If you go onto the Board of Ed website, there are several new positions that are listed on the Board of Ed website. There's a financial support specialist and a district STEM coordinator. The district STEM coordinator was slated to be cut in the, different position?
We cut the K-6 coordinator,
Right.
and then Mr. Grice will be vacating his position, which was not cut, and what I suppose became the K-12, and so with his vacancy, then that position becomes open.
Okay, regardless, there's two new positions. Would it be more prudent to keep the reading specialist, math coach in front of the students as opposed to adding new positions in?
It's not a new
that
position.
We don't.
That's not a new position. So Harold's position is vacant. It's not a new position. We're replacing a necessary position that has system-wide implications.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not a new position. We're not adding a new position. It's a vacant position, an administrative position that oversees the core subject areas, specifically in the STEM area, that we're looking to fill, not create brand new.
Okay, and the other position?
I'm happy to address that.
Financial support.
The financial specialist position is really critical. It's been vacant for about a month, and we are very concerned because it handles food service support, it handles free and reduced lunch applications, it handles student activity fund oversight, and registration, which is critical. So the position has evolved, and honestly, with the reductions that we are recommending for the admin center already, there simply are no other positions to absorb any more work.
Through the chair to Dr. Mrs. Mangini. So that position was already in the budget prior to these discussions.
Absolutely.
So it's not really a new position, it's
Simply vacant at the moment. It's the person who is in it took a job in Human Resource Office, and it's been vacant now for about 6 weeks.
I don't know if there's any way we can indicate, and I'm sure Ms. Bedell would feel the same, I assume she would feel the same way, if there's any way that could be indicated that they are in the budget already, that they're not new positions, that they're just filling, somehow that has to get out to the public, that we're not going to be eliminating some positions tonight and then hiring new people. Is there any way that can be done?
In the public posting, it wouldn't be practice to post it in that way. I think internally we can probably make note of it for our public, but when we post it on our public website or any other platform, I think there's some implications on the candidate pool.
Because it is very difficult to sit here tonight and do what we have to do, not knowing that those positions are already in the budget from before. I knew about the STEM, that I knew about, but I just think people need to be made aware. We know, we understand the process, but there's a lot of people that don't understand the process. And if I was a parent, and I don't think I would be, I am a parent, but if I was a parent with children in the school system, I have grandchildren in the school system, I'd be very upset that we are phasing out some other positions and thinking we're hiring new people. So I think.
So I think what's you captured that, Ms. Lance. What is important to note is that outside of maybe grant opportunities, specifically the Alliance grant, there aren't new positions. These are existing positions that have to be vacant, right? In this fiscal year, and by and large, as part of the shift we're just making from this calendar year, these are positions that exist in the fiscal year budget. The only positions that might come as a reduction were the ones that were adopted at the 4.5% with the board, right? And then the ones that are in conversation today. But the positions that you may see are not brand new positions, they're vacant positions which are open for candidates.
Just in response, just to kind of sum up where I was thinking here, while I appreciate that the finance position and the STEM coordinator position are critical positions, all of these positions are critical. And I think it's much more important that we have these teachers and specialists in front of these kids, considering our scores, the Alliance designation, et cetera. And I really think that we need to think through these positions before we start taking away from these kids.
I would respectfully disagree. I certainly, number one, feel that every position is critical. I've talked about that broadly. There's some realities here that we have to have a conversation about as it relates to what that $2.5 million reduction means. Keep in mind, I've said this very publicly, I don't think it's debatable as to whether or not the STEM position is an essential position. What we do with math, what we do with science emerges on the Alliance District Accountability Index. What happens to our kids as they matriculate through our school system from elementary school all the way to secondary school has a lot to do with math and science as well as the humanities. When we talk about systemizing practices across the district at the middle, elementary, and high school level, instructional practices and allowing the curriculum to make sure that kids have similar experiences in each classroom, there is a node or a nexus to how that work plays out. And oftentimes, it's that position right there. Mr. Grice will tell you in this position, and Sam Rosenberg will tell you in this position, 5 days a week they're up and about working with teachers, they're up and about working in buildings. I will say point blank, that is not a position that should be even in the forefront of any kind of consideration for a reduction.
Mr. Davis.
We've been talking about an hour now, and I haven't heard anything on mental health in students. We're cutting the social workers and staff. Thank you, sir. And staff. Dr. Sunday, or your staff, can you address, what are we doing as a district addressing that? Because we're coming off 2 years of the pandemic, it's been very, very tough on students and staff.
Yeah, and so I'll start with that. Social emotional well-being, as you know, we've been in our strategic plan process, is a priority for the district and will be for future years. We know that a lot of the things that we talk about from the social emotional health emerges in the vision we have for what it means to be a graduate of Stratford Public Schools. We see that loud and clear. I'm going to invite Heather Borges to also maybe contribute to this conversation. But you'll probably also notice that as I analyze our operating budget, knowing that there's some real limitations here, you probably find corresponding goals as I have talked and presented out on the Alliance, right? So I've spoken about how social emotional health and culture and climate, all those different things, those different variables will be emergent in the Alliance plan. The other thing that we have the opportunity to do is continue to explore, and I have scheduled shortly after we break for summer to meet with Pam and Julie and Dr. Clemmy to do an organizational scan of our existing grants. Not every grant has a cadence where you can go back and modify. As you know, grants, once you submit the plan, it's pretty airtight. But from time to time, we have the opportunity to make slight adjustments. And some of the things that we are talking about is using those opportunities in the summer, not to supplant, but find opportunities where if we're afforded the ability to make a slight iteration, we need to make sure that our grants complement our grant budget and they're all aligned to district and board goals.
Just so you are clear about the shift, Johnson will have plenty of mental health staff. They will have 2 psychologists and a social worker. The goal, of course, and Ms. Mangini knows this and Dr. Sunny knows this, is to not lose that position, but to find a grant where we can fund that position so that the person will still support, again, our other elementary schools that have lots of needs. So Johnson will still have 2 psychologists and a social worker, okay? The social work position, if possible, will be repurposed into a grant and will be used to support other elementary schools that have needs. So plenty of mental health support in one elementary school, K to 6, more than what the other elementary schools have.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Johnson is different.
This is, will there be an administrator at Soto for the preschool?
Good question. Yeah, I'm actually going to invite Dr. Gates to maybe speak to that question.
An administrator at Soto? Yes, there will be. There will be an administrator who will be located in that building. We also have an individual who's overseeing the school readiness program as well. So there will be 2 individuals who will be overseeing the classes there.
So we're not, thank you, we're not really eliminating an administrator's position from Soto,
We're not replacing Dr. Paul's retirement vacancy.
but we will get somebody else.
We will have, absolutely. We'll have people there, but the program itself, Soto specifically, will be supported by Ms. Borges.
We'll have a current coordinator there. We won't be hiring a new person. We will repurpose and distribute responsibilities and have a current coordinator who is already hired and working for us in that building.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'll have a preschool in that program.
I know you do. I got you.
I was just going to ask if there was a possibility over the next couple of days that we can physically go to Soto and Johnson to see some of the proposed changes, some of the ideas.
I am not opposed to it. I don't want to make that commitment right now. Perhaps we can connect offline.
Okay.
Okay, so I have a pretty good lock schedule over the next couple of days, and I would like to be there with you.
Ms. Ryder.
Has there been any talk or discussion about expanding the ABA and STRIVE programs?
What do you mean expanded it?
Well, we have the physical facility they both house some of our out-of-district kids. By expanding that program, we can bring some of those out-of-district kids back to Stratford and create additional savings. So expanding the program is not a negative, but a positive in the budget line.
Yeah, no, I understand what you mean. In this exact sense, I would invite Ms. Borges to speak to this. If I remember correctly, when we adopted our budget as a board, the board made the recommendation to reduce the 3 positions, the 3 slots for students, right, that we estimated. I think PPTs have a high say on the placement of the child, right? And when you talk about expanding the physical space, I think we're in early parts of those conversations. I don't think we have anything pinned down just yet.
Would expanding those programs create additional savings in our budget?
So not initially, as we've spoken about, obviously, they're expanding on their own anyway.
Yeah.
Mr. Henry, just so you know, that, our population and our students, and we are growing. Our ABA program has grown from 36 to 52. Our STRIVE program will be up above 24 next year. transition program. Those are wonderful things. We love keeping our students here in district, so they are naturally expanding. You don't recognize those savings immediately. When a student does not go to an outplacement and stays in one of our programs, you recognize those savings over time. And what we do in special education is really work hard with our grant funds and our other funds to try to expand the programs that way and then sustain them through our operating budget as the expansions happen. So it's a long process that takes time, but they are naturally expanding. We are seeing growth every year in our programs because we are meeting the needs of students and we have beautiful programs.
But we could hypothetically see some savings
Eventually, yeah.
in the first year of implementing the program?
Probably not, right? Heather
Probably
and I
not.
have talked about
Yeah,
that.
probably not right away. You would expand the program, and I might say to you, there might be a meeting where I come to you and say, hey, we have wonderful return and a lot of kids coming back to district and our number, we're able to service our kids appropriately here. Remember, our goal is to always service them appropriately. If we can't do it here, they need to be outplaced so that we can do it there because they have a right to an appropriate education. Is there always a chance for expansion? Yes. And they're expanding and we're meeting their needs as they go, but it's a slow grow. It's not like you just build a program and you bring 100 kids back. That's not how it works. There's meetings, there's planning, there's advocates, there's lots of things that go into that. So over time, we would hope to recognize savings while seeing a beautiful growth in our programs.
And I think it's important to note that it's an absolute wonderful idea and it's where we want to go, but there's also resources needed immediate to grow the program. So while that is our goal, and Heather and I plan to spend time together over the summer, hopefully over a picnic table, seriously, to really talk about some of these opportunities along with Dr. Sunday and the team. We do recognize that it won't be immediate, but it's definitely
It actually typically costs money first, right? Cost money, save money over time. So it's really not in our conversation right now.
And I would just say, if I can, it's really with the 3-year-olds, that's the ones you want to bring into the program right away.
Yes.
The 19-year-olds, yeah, you're saving for 2 years. The 3-year-olds, you're saving up to 19 years.
Yeah.
So that's and we did that, by the way, in the Stratford Public Schools almost 20 years ago when we brought an ABA program to Second Hill Lane back in 2002.
And I know we had talked about this in Dr. Sunday's phrase, re-engineered for efficiency. Bringing 3 of those 19-year-olds back saves, even for 1 year or 2 years, whatever it may be, has a significant savings. And if the opportunity is there by adding a small staff to do that, the savings could offset it in a year and even create some potential savings.
I think that's always our goal. It's just right now we're not in a process where we can add staff because we're looking at cuts right now.
Well,
and I just want to say something.
But part of it, I have the floor.
Mr. Henry.
But part of it is also, as we have the staff, we create savings, and in the budgeting process, we have to incorporate both ends of that, both the cost and the savings. So potentially would be a plus to the budget, not a drain to the budget.
But isn't there a process, Heather, that you have to follow in order for the child to
So there is.
be
There's a
returned?
huge PPT process in which, again, we have to have an appropriate transition back. So typically how it happens is we would have those meetings, and if I can return students, I would say to Ms. Mangini, I can return 4 students who are ready to come back, but in order for them to come back, we need X, Y, and Z staff in order for them to come back. That's usually how you try to expand your programs. I think it's a great conversation. I just don't know if it's the one we need to have right now because we're not talking about adding staff right now.
I would just say the concentration on Strive would be the one I would probably stay away from. The 3-year-olds concentrate on more because you're going to have a lawsuit on your hands on that one. If you outplaced a student for 16 years and you try to bring him back in, and you say we have an appropriate education for him, it's very, very difficult to do that.
And I don't think we're looking at bringing them back in. We're looking at making the program more efficient so that students can stay with us. Ones that have been with us at Pinal and at Stratford High School can continue to stay with us.
Correct.
Isabel.
I feel like we've talked a lot about possible changes or changes to Johnson House or Soto, or are all of these leading into a plan down the road? This is very reactionary to this budget season right now. Is there a larger plan in the works for these physical changes of buildings, repositioning of grades, all of this that we're talking about in the reaction right now?
Yeah, I think it's reactionary that's prompted by the depth of what we have to respond to. That's number one. I think there is going to be a plan down the road. I think we're in the early stages. I think there's been a few models that have been presented. I know Mr. Henry has been leading conversations about facilities. At this point in time, we have a realistic understanding that, from an enrollment standpoint, we're pretty much at capacity. I think the physical structures that we have here in our town require deeper conversations to make sure that we can accommodate enrollment increases in any kind of direction. But as of right now, I think broad conversation and further study is required before we figure out the best model.
Yeah, and this, not for this evening, but we have to put this somewhere in the budget down the next year or two to do a full 360 of our delivery model. And I think that is something you and I have talked about. I think I've spoken to every board member on this, including Sue and I have talked about it. But I think the K-6 model, having 2 7-8 schools, having 2 high schools that are 9-12, I think we just need to look at it and say, are we spending the taxpayers' money the most efficiently? And I can look at you and say, I think we can do it better than we're delivering it today.
Again, that would require further study. We're not at that point. We are at a reduction point right now.
We are, but I think along with the reductions, we need to start looking at the improvements at the same time, because we're not, by continuing to react to these numbers, we're not growing anything.
So what I'm trying to also share with you, Ms. Bedell, respectfully, is that we had no choice but to react.
No, I understand,
So
I understand that.
The town made their appropriation on May 11th, so we are naturally in a very reactionary state. But it's also further constricted with the fact that, to the point that I made earlier, we're not required as a board to reduce by 1 million or 750,000, it's 2.5. So everything does feel reactionary. But at the same time, over the last 2 weeks, I've spent probably a cumulative 16 or 17 hours in this room on the board with that team and talking with individuals about the best way to make sure this works so people are not impacted substantially. Now, with a district our size, and I shared with you that we are the 14th largest district, we cannot just put plans on paper overnight. It requires deep levels of study, it requires deep levels of resources, right? And consultants, right? And time and energy. And forgive me for saying this, but we've been very busy with this work over the last 4 months, right? And other different things that we have going on. So what needs to happen is we need to spend the time, whether it's the summer and the early fall, to have a conversation. That conversation begins right here with this board about what we need to put into place to study this, so maybe we can potentially re-examine the model and find efficient ways to deliver our academic program to all of our kids. But that will not happen overnight. It doesn't happen over 5 months, it doesn't happen over 6 months, and it certainly doesn't happen that quickly for an organization this size. There's more work to come, but we do have to go and do our due diligence.
So where do we go from here now?
To me. Ideally, I would allow all of us to sit with this information for a bit, direct any further questions that you might get later this evening or tomorrow morning to Dr. Stender, to whomever might be best positioned to answer them, and then we can reconvene as soon as possible, because ideally we get this difficult decision made as soon as possible so that we can begin the next steps. So that is what I was thinking. I am certainly open to
And just from procedure, you going right to board with this? Or are you going back to finance and board?
finance to board.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
So could we look at early next week so that we can, I know you said there's only 2.5 weeks left and we've got to get the word out to the right people, unfortunately, what's going to happen. I mean, could we do something maybe Monday night? I don't know.
I think that, yeah, we might go offline
You'll go.
and discuss, because this could go on for 2 hours. I think with all this talking about our various and assorted schedules, I know, everybody's quite busy, but I think that we can find an evening, and hopefully it will not be a tremendously long meeting, having had all of this discussion this evening. So stay tuned for the next date, but again, as soon as possible. Are there any further questions? Okay. Seeing no further questions.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn, thank you, Mr.
Second.
David, second by Sue Lance, all in favor?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned at 7:44.